Hello my friends, it's time for us to do 14.2. I'm in a hurry to get this one done, so you're in luck. I'll be as quick as I can. We're on page 386 in chapter 14, and these are the technologies that we use to treat wastewater from humans and livestock. Can you think of a good song to add to this video? I can't, because basically all we're talking about is the water treatment facility. And when you're not connected to the water treatment facility, you're connected to a septic system. So that's the first thing to cover here, septic systems. And people have these. You might even have one at your house if you're not connected to city sewage. And that is to say, you do not have to have a pipe that leaves your house and goes to a water treatment facility somewhere. You can just build your own septic system, and a lot of people still have them. If you've ever driven down Pine Avenue or up Pine Avenue, I'm familiar. You can see in the yard a big hump, and that is the leach field shown in this diagram here for the septic system. Remind me to tell you the story about my dad and his septic system before I even started school, back when I was like 4 years old. We had a problem with our septic tank. You can imagine that gets nasty. So the septic system requires no hookup. You are draining your own sewage. Basically, it's everything that goes down the drain. Now, when it's a septic system, it's the things that go down the toilet. When you flush the toilet, that stuff has to go somewhere, and it goes to a septic tank. So you can see the system here. You need to have a definition, and here is your definition of sludge. Sludge is, unfortunately, sorry to think about it, but it is the solid material that's left over after water gets treated. So it's your poop or whatever else gets flushed down the toilet that is solid material. When you flush the toilet and things come through this pipe here, it goes into the septic tank, and notice these openings are available so that you can have your septic system treated once in a while, and you need to do that about every 5 years or so. But essentially what happens here is whatever you flush down the toilet goes through the septic tank and it sits. The sludge falls to the bottom, and then there's a clear watery layer that's on top. That's called septage. You don't need to know that. I've never seen that asked on the AP or the ACE exam, so you don't need to remember that. But the septage is the water stuff, and that moves out of the septic tank, and it ends up going into a field. This field is called the leach field. And that water makes its way through here. These pipes are perforated, and that water sits there. It further gets filtered by gravel or soil or something, usually gravel of some sort there, and slowly seeps its way back down into the water table. The good news is, by the time that water makes its way down into the aquifer, it's been purified. It's very, very clean. The nice thing about a septic system is it's yours. It's your thing. You're not connected, like I said, to any sort of a sewage system anywhere. And even the water that ends up seeping down is good for the environment. The solid material builds up over time and has to get pumped out, like I said, every 3-5 years, something like that, because you got to get that solid material, that sludge, out of there. If this thing backs up, you got problems. All right, so here's your terminology. You need to know what sludge is, and now you do. We're going to use that in the next terminology as well. And you need to know what a leach field is. The leach field is the combination of pipes and lawn out in your yard, and that's where the water seeps through. Sewage treatment plants get asked about all the time on the ACE and the AP exams. So you need to be able to describe, just like you needed to know how electricity gets made, you need to know how sewage treatment plants operate. What happens with the water when it leaves your house? Now, for us here in Clay County, all of the water that goes down every drain, whether it's a sink or a toilet, ends up going to one pipe that leaves your house. All of that makes its way to our sewage treatment plant, which is in Green Cove Springs. So you can imagine all the pipes that have to be connected correctly in order to get what you flush down the toilet to the sewage treatment plant. The sewage treatment plant puts this sewage through two processes. One's called primary and one's called secondary. There's a nice diagram in your book to show you, and I've got it here. Alright, so first, every house has one pipe leaving it, and it usually is under the street where these pipes, and by the way, these pipes are completely enclosed, okay? This is raw sewage. This is not going to the sewer grates that are on streets. You know, that rainwater that goes down a sewage grate, that just ends up running right to the St. Johns River. This is all enclosed. We can't have this stuff getting out because it's got poop in it and other things like that. Alright, so all of that piping ends up going all the way down to Green Cove Springs to the sewage treatment plant. At that point, it undergoes something called primary treatment. Primary treatment is nothing more than something called a settling tank. Write that down. It's called a settling tank. And the settling tank does its job. Water just sits there and the solid waste settles down to the bottom. That is the sludge once again. So it's mostly poop, but it's whatever else you flush down the toilet. And you guys can probably tell stories about some of the nasty, nasty things you've ended up flushing down the toilet, including dead pets like fish and frogs and things. And there's other things. For instance, I know something that's commonly done, pharmacists recommend you do when your medications go out of date. You flush them down the toilet. You don't want to take them. Well, all of those chemicals end up at the sewage treatment plant. So the solid material falls out, and just by gravity, we let the solid material settle out. This is called sludge. And that sludge might be usable again. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so after that water sits and the sludge falls out, the water goes into what's called secondary treatment. In secondary treatment, this water is pretty clean, right? The solid material has fallen out. Most of the sludge is gone, but we know that there's still some. So we allow secondary treatment to occur. With secondary treatment, now the water that's pretty clean is aerated. We pump air into the water, and that churns the water up, and it also helps to get bacteria acting on whatever solid material is left to further break it down. And you can see here, that's what step 4 is. Bacteria break down the organic material. This is aerobic activity because air is being used. Oxygen is part of the process. So aerobic bacteria breaking down the organic material is a good thing. And of course, you're going to have a little bit of extra sludge come down and be left, and that goes to the same place that the other sludge went. Make sense to you? Okay. The next thing that has to happen is this water has to go for further cleaning. And here is where it goes. It goes into these tanks where either chlorine is added, exposure to chemicals. Sometimes it's chlorine. At ours, it's chlorine. But I've seen an ultra-modern sewage treatment facility in Mandarin, and they use UV rays. So they actually turn a light on. This is an example of the UV radiation. So the UV rays are killing bacteria that are in this tank, because we cannot let water that's got bacteria in it make its way back to the river. And that is what happens ultimately. After we expose, we disinfect the water. either with a chemical or UV radiation. I've heard of using ozone. O3. I've heard of using ozone to kill pathogens that might be in the water. So you need to remember all three of those. All right, remember them, write them down, whatever. Chlorine, UV rays, or ozone are used to kill the bacteria. Now the water is very, very clean and it's ready to be sent back into the St. Johns River, and that's exactly what happens. Now we do have to worry about chemicals that might still be in the water because after all, as you might imagine, we've killed the bacteria in this water, but what about fertilizers? What about chemicals? What if you broke a thermometer at your house and just dumped the mercury down the toilet? Well, that is all still in the water. And so there is a concern when the water ends up coming back into the St. Johns that this is very nutrient rich. It's got nitrates and phosphates in it, and so you can get an algal bloom right near where the pipe is that dumps into the river. So they're very careful to monitor that often. All right, let's talk about what happens to the sludge. There's going to be some solid material in that sludge that's kind of nasty. But if it's all organic, if it's just plain old poop, it can be reused. And you can buy these bricks. They're sold as bricks. You can buy these bricks at Pat's Nursery, at Home Depot. It's actually sludge material that's been tested to make sure that it's clean enough to be put into people's yards and used as fertilizer. Most of the sludge does not pass the test because there are some kind of nasty things in that sludge, like for instance mercury or some other harmful metal that ended up being dumped by the homeowner, and so it ended up getting into the sludge, and most of the sludge therefore goes to the landfill. We just take it and throw it out just like we would any other garbage. It can be burned. That's for incinerators. That's if you handle your garbage with incineration. We don't. It just goes to a landfill. So the solid material that leaves your house ends up at the dump. I hope that I've explained that clearly enough for you. Let's see what these videos can help us with. All right, before we go to that video, a couple more things I wanted to mention. Well, at least one anyway. We talk about this thickened sludge taken to the landfill. And again, it gets tested, and if it's clean enough, it can be used as fertilizer, which of course is reused. That's fabulous for the environment, because we're going to learn in another chapter about how our landfills are becoming too full because of all the garbage that we produce. And part of that garbage is our solid waste, our solid materials there. But in order to make it usable for fertilizer, you will find that at a lot of these sewage treatment plants, they have dryers, almost an oven-like setup. And they put this sludge in flat pans, great big ones obviously, like the size of a room, and they put it in these ovens and harden it, dry it out, so that it can be cut up into bricks that can be sold at the Home Depot or Pat's Nursery, places like that. Okay, remind me to show you these other quick little videos that I have here that are further of interest in seeing exactly what happens during sewage treatment. There's one other thing to cover in this section, and that has to do with animal wastewater. It's obviously becoming more and more of a problem because there's more people on Earth than ever before. Then there must be more cows than ever before. We have to grow livestock in order to feed all the freaking people. So we have to do something about their poop. especially when they are confined in those animal lots. You remember seeing those feed lots in a video that I showed you when we covered the Feeding the World chapter. So one of the ways that we deal with that is to develop these things called manure lagoons. And literally what ends up happening is on these large farms with these large cattle operations, they dig a big hole and they make their own pond and they dump the animal sewage into this lake. That may sound disgusting, but the fact is these manure lagoons are a good idea because it keeps the animals healthier, it keeps the humans that work here healthier as well. And also, if this is placed in the proper location, then any runoff, if there happens to be plants being grown, agriculture happening, and they use fertilizers, the fertilizers can end up leaching their way into this manure lagoon as well. The big risk with these manure lagoons, and they're showing up more and more as we continue to have these really, really large-scale cattle operations, is will these manure lagoons leak? Usually it's got some kind of a plastic liner or clay liner around the edge, but what happens if there's a problem with that liner and it ends up leaking? Then this animal sewage ends up in our drinking water and disease outbreaks can occur. I think that's it for this particular section. One last thing to mention is in the book they mentioned the fact that you might be surprised at the number of places, even developed countries, that take their sewage and just don't treat it at all and dump it directly into a large body of water, a large river, maybe even an ocean. And also, some of the older sewage treatment plants do receive the stormwater drainage, and sewage ends up going directly into storm drains when we have an excessive rain, because the wastewater treatment plant gets overwhelmed. These are big problems, and it contaminates drinking water, contaminates beaches, fish, shellfish, and leads to human illness. This happens more than you think. In the United States, they say 500,000 illnesses are linked to drinking sewage contaminated water. And it's happened right here in Eagle Harbor. If I haven't told you the story before, remind me to tell it to you in class. Okay. The next water pollution that we'll discuss in the next video is going to be a long video, and it's going to be about heavy metals and other substances that are really, really dangerous to humans that end up in our water systems, and we have to be very, very careful to get rid of them, or people get harmed, people die. That's enough for today. Thanks for watching. See you later.